Hello, good afternoon. Hello. Good day. All right. Live. Are you in? Yes, he's in.
Alright, cool.
Hi, Kalain.
Hey.
How are you?
I'm good.
Okay.
Just got back from running all my errands, so.
Okay.
yeah,
I'm good with you for the next hour or so.
yeah.
Yeah.
That's good.
That's how it goes. The conversation tends to flow. So everyone, this is Conversations with a Journalist. We have as a special guest Kalain Hosein, who is the weather anchor at CNC3 and also the founder of TT Weather Center. So we're going to dive into some of the topics, get to know him more. A lot of people just see him on air and don't really know about him. So we're going to delve into who he is a bit, what it takes to get his job done every day, and what really drives him as a journalist. Yes? So, Kalain, I learned that you're in your 20s. Is that the case? Tell us
Yeah,
about
I'm 27. I'm 27, yeah.
yours. So you're still a baby in the field of
Yeah,
journalism. How did you get your
yeah, yeah, but my office is quite young. We have a lot of young people as well. I was the youngest for about 2 years in GML in the newsroom, but we've gotten quite a few more younger people in the office, so that's nice not to be the
yeah?
baby anymore.
Yes. I've never experienced that, but I'm sure it's nice to no longer be the baby. Okay, so myself, just being a fan of CNC3 over the years, I would have seen you just pop out of nowhere. So I don't know if a lot of people would have experienced. There's a new weather anchor. Where did he come from? Is CNC3 your first foray into media?
Yeah, so I actually didn't want to be in media to begin with. I enjoy my privacy, right? So when I was first offered the job, I told them no. Yeah, right? It's crazy. And recently, I think August 1st made it 4 years that I've been there now. But yeah, CNC3 is my first foray into the traditional media.
Okay, so tell us about your background. I mean, we know you're passionate about weather. What kind of subjects would you have had to study in the secondary and level?
Yeah, so secondary school, I didn't do it in Trinidad. In fact, I lived in Texas for a little while before university. So I would have done the equivalent of GCSEs because I went to a British school in the US. So I did the equivalent of GCSEs. So that's like just a British standard. And then my equivalent of A levels would have been the International Baccalaureate Diploma, which is like A levels on steroids, honestly. But even then, I would have done at the A levels level, I would have done biochem physics, maths, Spanish, and geography. So those would have been the subjects I did. But in an American university, which is where I went to, the subjects don't really matter as much. It's not like Trinidad where you have to do certain subjects at A levels to get into UE to do a certain degree. You could do any subjects in high school there and go on to do any degree that you want to, both in the American system and even the UK system to a lesser extent. So that's what I did. And then at the undergraduate level, I would have done my bachelor's in geophysics and seismology. So that's earthquakes, geoscience. But I was always very interested in meteorology. Got a minor in that as well as geology and math. So quite a couple credentials under my belt. And even while I was at university, because I didn't do a double major, I still did a lot of the classes that people who would have gone through meteorology, at least freely available ones online. I did those online as well, and they're freely available for anybody who wants to do them, mind you. But yeah, that was my educational background. And while I was at university, then I launched Weather Center. So the rest is history from there.
Okay, so as you mentioned Weather Center, because I came from the corporate communications unit at Ministry of Works, and I remember Weather Center being a pest in our backside. We would try to, okay, there's a flood here, divert here, and then Titi Weather Center always had it first, right? So from a communication standpoint, it was, I was like, okay, don't follow them. Don't listen to what they said. Follow us. We are the authority on traffic and roads and diversions. So what was the formative years of Titi Weather Center? What kind of started that journey for you?
Yeah. So I would have started it in 2014, but not actually pay a lot of attention to it until 2017. So what started it for me was that back then, 2014, everybody was still getting their news from Facebook. So in that regard, not much has changed. But what was lacking back then was the authoritative voices from the Ministry of Works, the Met, ODPM. I can list off all the ministries that lacked on social media. So you had already fake news starting to spread. And then because a lot of people were getting their news from social media, there's a lot of events that fell by the wayside that the public warned. Now, me, I am in a bedroom 2,500 miles away, and I'm seeing these things playing out, and I'm like, how is nobody else picking up on this? So, Weather Center launched as a result, a direct result of a lack of social media presence from the ODPM and the Met Service, and now the Rural Development Ministry as well. They've taken a larger role in reporting these hydrometeorological impact events. So that's how it started. And then I think because it was such like a ground roots movement that a lot of people would send in content, I would verify it and then post it. And a lot of people built, like even to this day, like I know about events that are happening before the authorities do, because the people that are directly impacted by it would submit content to Weather Center and to me, and I would be able to check in with the authorities. A lot of times I would be the ones calling the councillors, calling the ODPM to be like, hey, are you all aware of this? And then they would be like, no, we send in somebody to check it now. So yeah, that's how it started. And I mean, it really has grown quite a bit. From 2017 was really when I started using it quite a bit till now. I mean, I don't even know what the latest numbers on the page looks like, but yeah.
Yes. We always envious of your growth and your reach. So kudos to you. And then when I found it was you who started it, I said, okay, no, I have to get you on the live to hear more about the Weather Center. And I also had a pet peeve how you spelled the center, the American.
So it's registered in the United States.
Oh.
I genuinely don't like the RE.
Yeah.
That is a peeve of mine. I like the ER. So yeah, that's why the ER is stuck.
So this started before you even had a name to yourself? Is it that person?
Yeah. So if you go back to prior to 2017, if you look up even prior to like October 2017, I never associated my name with it. And that is an important branding point. Because if something happened to Weather Center, I don't want to tarnish my personal brand. And if something happened to me, I don't want to tarnish that brand. So keeping it separate was very important to me. And I think it was, she's now one of my friends, Carla Bridgelal. After the flooding in October 2017, around Diwali time, where the highway was flooded, nobody knew what was going on, but Weather Center was on the ball with it. And then subsequently the floods in south with Mosquito Creek being impassable and all that stuff. She wanted to find out who is the guy behind Weather Center. So that's how my name finally got attached to it. But even to this day, I try to keep the identities as separate as possible.
So she got an exclusive scoop?
Yeah, I mean, and the thing is, it wasn't even like that exclusive. She just reached out to the page to find out who was running it, and I was just like, okay, me, because like I'm not trying to hide it at the same time, right? Like I'm not trying to be all sketch about it too. So yeah, she just reached out and we started talking, and she's like, she wanted to interview me for an article, and that is how the identity got leaked, so to speak.
Yeah, good job, Carla. Good job. So you made an interesting point. You said you were receiving anonymous videos or videos just pouring into your pages. What was that kind of response like? And did you know that you were onto something here?
Yeah. So even at the start, when stuff was going down, people would be sharing their videos on social media. So when Weather Center just created, honestly, a hub for people to share their videos. allowed me to verify it. And when things get tough, I have a very small team that I usually work with. And now that I'm at GML, I'm a lot more hands off in the day-to-day runnings of it. But there's a small team of people that is able, all volunteers, mind you, to just check in, make sure these things are legit, and then post with additional context information. So yeah, and it wasn't anonymous. These people would have sent it in via their Facebook page attached to Facebook. So that's how it started. And then as we gradually moved into other platforms, Twitter, Instagram, BIP, Telegram, WhatsApp, and now Threads, uh, other people will submit videos via those platforms as well. So there's always an identity link to it, at least most of them. And once something, honestly, we the same advice I would tell the public: if there's a video that's too good to be true, check for a secondary source. We apply that same rule. Like if we get a video that a tornado touches down in Port of Spain, we're not gonna run with it. We want to make sure that actually happened.
And it's interesting that you're touching on the journalistic principles, even as someone who has never studied journalism, you know, the double checking of sources, the verifying of information before posting, in an age where the first one to get the exclusive or the first one to post it is one that, you know, receives the shiner, quote unquote. So what kind of exposure have you had to journalism prior to when you launched?
None.
None.
None. Absolutely none. I mean, outside of just reading a couple of news articles, like none.
So it was more of an integrity that you knew this was the right thing to do.
Remember when I said like why I started it? There was a bunch of uninformed conversations happening online about impacts that were unfolding across Trinidad and Tobago, and there was a lack of an authoritative voice. Weather Center acted as an authoritative voice for a little while before the Met Office, the ODPM, the Rural Development Ministries found a social media management strategy so that they can become the voices that needed to be there. And I always said, like, at the start, when I launched Weather Center, the day that, in my opinion, I see that these ministries and these offices are acting the way that they're supposed to be online, there really isn't a need for me for Weather Center. I mean, the Rural Development Ministry has made significant strides. So has the Met Office. The ODPM they are coordinating agency. They're not necessarily the public front in a disaster, but there's still some work to be done.
Good. And I would say, yes, I give you the nod as well because it helped us to push up our game because we hated to have to retweet what TT Weather Center put out. We hated to have to, you know, we wanted to be the ones that get it. So I'd say kudos for you, just from a communication point. It made us step up our game a bit in my past life in your goods and transport. So let's get to you joining the GML team. How were you discovered and how did you fit into, I mean, there's so much I could think of. Is there a green screen behind? How are you practicing? How do you know how to present on camera? What was that journey like for you?
So again, prior to GML, I had no experience in traditional media. So this was all extremely new to me. I was headhunted because they were looking for a weather anchor and they reached out to me and I was deeply uncomfortable with it. So the first month I would have started August 2019. And I would have been in voice training, even though I didn't really need it because I'm a decent speaker, decent communicator. I had really good writing skills based off of Weather Center. So it was really me getting comfortable behind the camera. So I would have been training. Yes, there's a green screen. Yes, there's like TVs all around the room where I'm able to, you know, look and reference where I'm pointing to. And after practicing it for a little while, it became much more normal, and I was able to know how far to extend my arm, and I knew essentially. But it was not easy by any means necessary. When I first started, I would have pre-recorded quite a bit, so that way I can do multiple takes to look as smooth as possible. Because I only jumped on camera live, quote unquote live, end of August, beginning of September, and during that, like I think it was for the first couple months, I was pre-recording, and when I went live, it was I wasn't very good at ad-libbing or speaking off the cuff. So it was all scripted as well. So I was using a teleprompter. And then it would have been the hurricane season of 2020. Yeah, because I was started 2019. Then at the time, one of our news gathering editors, Fane Richards, she was just like, okay, it's time for you to start speaking off the cuff. And I did some nights of the week ad-libbing, some nights of the week using a script, and the ones where I was ad-libbing, yeah, it was a little bit shaky, but the flow of it felt much more natural.
Yes.
So at some point, June 2020, we went straight to ad-libbing, and I have not looked back since. In fact, that is my preferred way of delivery now. For unless it's a very serious topic where I need to watch my jargon, for non-related things, I would prefer to ad-lib. And yeah, it's just been history since then. I mean, I feel like I've gotten a little bit more confident in front of the camera and a little bit more confident using the green screen. Certainly, yeah.
And when you say ad-libbing, okay, so you say, good night, everyone, today's weather is, and you just rattle. What does,
What's
give me
your
an idea.
for that like? Yeah. So recently, within the past year, I've been doing this exercise within the newsroom of trying to train a couple folks to present weather. Just to present. They will be running using a script, but at the same time, I want to give them as much knowledge as possible that I know of how to at least present and how to put the data together. Because the systems that I use, it has the ability to auto-populate the weather information that you're seeing on screen based on model data. So in theory, I am not needed if they are going to, if you just need somebody to be pretty and look in front of a screen, stand in front of a screen and present it, right? But the thing is, model data is not always correct, and you need to know how to interpret that data and interpret the biases to forecast it correctly. Because Trinidad and Tobago, we know that if it storms in Diego Martin, it's going to be hot and sunny in San Fernando sometimes. And these models essentially lump all of Trinidad and Tobago into one point and forecast one piece of information for that entire point. So knowing how to interpret the model data and all of that takes time, it takes experience, right? So putting together a weather forecast for me takes about 3 to 4 hours, which is pretty standard for most forecasting offices. Most people do, 6-hour shifts of forecasting the next 6 hours kind of thing. And that process is very, very difficult, especially when right now our forecasts are pretty cut and paste, afternoon showers favoring Western Trinidad, typical wet season stuff. We have nothing major around, but when we have sometimes these active tropical waves or tropical storms moving through, sometimes troughs, the intertropical convergence zone, all these different features of the wet season, they can complicate a forecast, and you need to know how to interpret models, how to interpret the actual data that we have that's measured by instruments across the region, and how that all plays into whether tomorrow is going to be sunny or rainy. So all that to say, it's not something that I can just print off and read a forecast. It's something that I prepare these graphics every night. I go through each one to make sure that the information that's on those graphics are what I want to be talking about. And then, once I would do a run through right before it starts, not necessarily like I will go over it ad verbatim to repeat for the 7 p.m. news, but just to make sure the points that I want to talk about is shown on those slides.
Okay, great. And I'm so glad you brought up that myth, because from where we stand, they always talk about sports being no longer relevant because it's in the past, and this field and that field is dying. And as you mentioned, weather is just something you could Google, okay, what's the weather like tomorrow? So I'm glad that you raised that point about the amount of work that goes into preparing your broadcast, So if the news starts at 7, what time do you normally have to be at work? Because there's another perception that persons who are not on camera for the entire length of the news, they probably just have to walk in and they're handing a script. And what is your day like when you get to set?
I'm not sure how it is in other newsrooms. I'm going to speak to GML's newsroom. All of our anchors are deeply involved with the news process. So the anchors on set are Rhea and Ryan. They are the main news anchors. Jassy, he is sports, and I am weather. Rhea is the lead editor of broadcast, so she has to check script. She has all of the broadcast duties, but also she checks scripts, liaises with the senior producer, acts like a senior producer, and some days ensure that everything goes as smoothly for the 7 p.m. news. Ryan is a news gathering editor, which means he's responsible for finding the stories, developing the stories, sometimes writing stories himself. Jassy, in addition to being a sports anchor, he's also a reporter and producer for sports. So he writes the stories, produces the stories to get it on air. Same way, I have to write and produce any weather segments that go on air as well, in addition to any environmental and climate reports that we want to use in news or even on paper. And the thing is, all of us operate in a multimedia environment. So in GML, we have this one newsroom where, we produce stories for print, for television, for online, and even because we have a radio arm of the company as well, we produce headlines and stories for radio at times. So we all work exceptionally hard. It's not we just show up in front of the camera at 7 p.m., get handed a script, and go with God. We work long hours. I mean, personally, I'm not sure for the other folks, but my shift technically is from 12 p.m. to 8 p.m., but we all know weather doesn't just happen in those 8 hours. So technically, I am on call 24/7. If something were to happen in the middle of the night, the understanding is that I would be available to produce content for GML to inform the public, because at the end of the day, this is a public service.
Well said. And I hope everyone there is listening and learning as we go along, because a lot of information we're sharing here. So you would have mentioned some persons you work with in the newsroom, the Faye Richards, the Real. When it came to you getting in front of the camera, was there anyone in particular you looked to emulate or to look to for inspiration who would have done this in the past?
So I would have looked at all our local anchors from Robin Maraj come forward. So that was the initial entry to this. And then because I hold the Weather Channel in the highest regard, at least when it comes to presenting the weather. Look at them, BBC, Al Jazeera. Those were some of the anchors, or at least the segments that I would look to see how they moved around the screen and understand their capability as well as the limitations that I have in the newsroom and within studio specifically. Because some of them are able to move around the screen on both sides because they have a different setup than I do. It's not the same case for me. So I was able to, look at all of these things and figure out how best to position myself, how best to present. I wouldn't necessarily say I'm the greatest at it still. I still think I have a lot of work to do, but I'm happy with my progress so far.
Excellent. And when we think of a journalist, we think of someone out in the field, they're conducting interviews and so. Just doing some research on you, I know you would have done high-end, high-level interviews with persons in the climate field. So what was that like, and what was it like getting a taste of the question and answer and the feedback with a typical journalist does?
Yeah, so when I first started in Trinidad, before we even jumped to the climate conferences, I was very, very, very shy. So trying to ask questions to people that you typically see on TV without realizing I am not one of those people on TV, it was difficult for me. But I would have get guidance from Faye was a big one for me, Faye Richards, because I absolutely love how she conducted interviews. Akash as well, Akash Samaru. Even the folks that work around me, Bavita Gopalcha and Ria Rambali. At the time, Rose, she would have been our managing editor. The people that worked above me, I would always seek advice from them of how best to approach it. Because again, I had zero experience in media. So that allowed me to get pretty comfortable locally in asking questions. And I'm always an extremely well-prepared person when it comes to an interview. So if I'm going to interview somebody, and I think a lot of journalists do this, I take a deep dive in the stuff that they've said prior, what I want to ask them, and what are the issues that are in the public domain already concerning the topic that we're going to discuss. So that way I can be like, okay, well, if they say something contrary, I'll be like, well, you said this a couple of weeks ago, and try and hold their feet to the fire, right? And I think because of that experience that I had locally with government ministers and within the scientific community and all that stuff, and being well prepared, and I always ask the best questions when it comes to at least environmental topics because I know what I'm talking about. That prepared me really well for when I went to COP. So COP27, this International Climate Conference in Egypt, I was there with a lot of people I never thought I'd be sharing a room with: presidents, prime ministers, heads of states, some of the best and brightest in the world when it comes to the climate space. But I think my experience in Trinidad, where I was already talking to the best and brightest here, and I knew that these are just people. I don't like put them on a pedestal for me to feel any kind of, I wouldn't want to say inferior, but necessarily nervous speaking to them. I think that that allowed me to be pretty prepared when I went into that space. And again, even with COP, I put in it was about 2 months of preparation to go there, looking at all of the different people that I wanted to talk to even before even getting there and preparing for that. So when I got there, I went there on a fellowship with 20 other journalists from around the world, and we went into, it was a group of 60,000 people there at COP. So it was a lot of people. But of my 20 people, every day, all the other journalists would be running around helter-skelter, trying to get their life together to get their stuff out, because they're all in different time zones as well, trying to get their stories out to their media outlets. And I was just coasting around because I came into this extremely prepared. So while they were all trying to finish their copy or finish their TV stories, I was actually helping them put their stuff together because I was pretty much done with my day. I finished my stories and stuff. I finished my interviews, and every day I tackled it with a plan. So it was a good validating experience for me to see how my preparation paid off.
Excellent, Kalain. And as we speak about climate change and weather, the headlines would have said that July would have been the hottest month recorded on Earth. We've seen all these different, every country is experiencing something different that they would never. I saw videos of Barbados, was it Barbados, with all these coastline water, thing. Yeah, you know what I'm talking about. What are your thoughts on weather patterns and climate change, and how prepared are we as a country, and as we have persons like me, I'm actually speaking on behalf of Caribbean nations who, of course, are most vulnerable when it comes to weather and climate change. What are your thoughts on Trinidad and our preparedness on a whole?
I mean, it is not an easy question to answer. So climate change, is a long-term change in weather patterns as a result of rising temperatures across the globe. And we unfortunately are seeing the lack of action in the past, the consequences of that today. Temperatures honestly have reached unprecedented highs. Whether it's our land temperatures, South America right now is supposed to be experiencing winter, and they're experiencing summer-like temperatures, some of the record highest ever. In the Caribbean region, same thing. We are experiencing very, very hot temperatures. Trinidad and Tobago, we're not experiencing record temperatures right now, but you don't need the temperature at Piarco to say anything more than 33 for you to realize that outside is hot. It's hot. And with a warmer climate generally, there was this quote I saw the other day. I can't remember where I saw it, but if you want to complain about the heat of today, remember this could be one of the cooler days of your lifetime. And that has stuck with me since I heard it recently, because we haven't done anything globally to a significant extent to stem these rising temperatures. Yes, you have international climate agreements that are supposed to limit our emissions, but realistically, when we look at right now, there's this process ongoing called the global stocktake process, which looks at each country and their pledges in the Paris Agreement in 2015, and how much progress have they actually made to, limit their emissions the way that they said they were going to? And as a result of the progress or lack thereof, what are our realistic warming levels going to look like? So for Trinidad and Tobago specifically, we have three pillars of our adaptation plan towards the Paris Agreement, which is reducing emissions across different sectors and reducing it by a certain percent, and energy transition and all that stuff. I mean, we are making strides, but we also have to realize that Trinidad and Tobago is a drop in the bucket compared to the rest of the world and the global players who continue to affect our environment adversely. And when it comes to our preparedness, if anything, and the preparations at the national level for certain events. But if I go on television, let me preface this by saying we have nothing on the horizon for Trinidad and Tobago. We have no systems. There's no storm coming.
Okay.
But if I go on television on Monday and say we have a system on our doorstep, and Trinidad and Tobago gets placed under a tropical storm something, and I'm even going to finish that sentence so nobody can cut the soundbite. But if I go and say something along those lines, our gas stations, our groceries, our ATMs are overwhelmed because people do not prepare ahead of ahead of the hurricane season, ahead of anything really. So when things start to hit the fan and we have something very close by, we see all of these last minute preparations from the country, and that is not what it is supposed to be. The ODPM in 2020 launched the National Disaster Preparedness and Prevention Month in May. They have a slew of activities that has been happening virtually and in person since 2020 throughout the entire month of May to prepare the population and to sensitize the population of the hazards that happen during the wet and hurricane season. But yet every time we have a flood, every time we have a disaster, every time we have a weather event, you always hear the people say, where was the warning, and this and that and the other. And to some extent, they are right. Sometimes these things happen without warning. But other times, you just need to look at what the Met Office is saying for weather events. And also, you were supposed to be prepared for a flood, a hurricane, an earthquake. These tips exist on the ODPM's website and other online platforms that you can go to and find the resources to prepare you for a disaster. And climate change is a much more short to medium to long-term disaster with a bunch of different hazards that we all need to be prepared for in a bunch of different ways. And our preparedness for that, in my opinion, is lacking.
Because we always hear persons, I mean, we're all citizens here. I don't know if anybody is viewing outside of Trinidad and Tobago, but they always say if anything serious was to hit, we would not be ready. And what you're saying rings true to that. And me personally, having been on the ground, doing different flood relief for the ministry, we see that it is only getting worse and it's not getting better. So the criticism that places that never used to flood is now flooding, and here never had this before, and so I don't know what hope there is. I mean, as you mentioned, there are authorities in charge of preparing us and making us aware of what's going on and what is to come, but I echo your sentiments there. And someone is commenting, bro, I don't complain. God is in control. He's in control of the universe. So why worry about the weather?
I mean, that is another that a bunch of Trinidadians have. I don't fault him. I think God is a Trini mentality. It's something that people in disaster preparedness and management fields are a little bit worried about, because when something does happen, the lack of preparedness seems to cause some dire consequences that doesn't necessarily need to happen. So for example, when you see a riverine flood alert, the way that people are supposed to respond to that, they don't usually. You still see people driving into floodwaters on a daily basis when it does flood. And when I say driving into the floodwaters, like driving through a river that is crossing the road and their vehicles are being washed off the road, or they're being trapped in flooding and then putting their lives and first responders' lives at risk. We know that many of our roofs in this country are not necessarily secured very well. hurricane straps. You can get them at a bunch of different organizations for free, and if you are willing to, purchase it. And I see somebody say, if that guy's home ever flooded, you will think differently. My home has flooded, and I know how to prepare for it. Um, and you know what to do when rain starts falling if you live in a flood-prone area. But yeah, back on the preparing for it, there are things that you can put in place ahead of different seasons for the preventable disasters, whether it's you losing your roof. I mean, hurricane straps can only do so much if you have an unsecured roof, and a hurricane actually passes through, which is a rare thing for Trinidad and Tobago. And some areas of the country, we're experiencing areas that don't usually flood. So yes, you'll be taken by surprise the first time, but that first time should be, all right, we need to get us we need to be ready for it next time it does happen in case it happens. So,
do you think some of the skepticism with believing reports is that it's so hard to accurately report on the weather? We might hear it's a sunny day today, and no need for umbrellas, and then there's a downpour. Is the challenge of reporting the accuracy of our weather broadcast or forecast dampen the way people react to these rain alerts and all of that?
I fully agree. I mean, and it's not just a local problem. In the US, you have complacency with severe thunderstorm warnings and watches, and tornado warnings that severe thunderstorms or tornadoes don't materialize. And there's a cry wolf situation where, okay, they put us under a tornado warning, but it never happened. So why do I need to worry about it now? Same thing in Trinidad. Like, because our islands, because it's Trinidad and Tobago, we can experience significantly different weather depending on where you are located and the type of weather that's moving across. It is very difficult to pinpoint exactly where on the island the worst of it will actually materialize. And I'll use an example that happened recently. So Tropical Storm Brett earlier this year moved north of Trinidad and Tobago. The center of it moved north of Trinidad and Tobago. Forecast models showed an area between 25 and 75 millimeters of rainfall falling across Trinidad and Tobago and somewhere within the southern Windward Islands, right? That band of rain did materialize, but you know where it materialized? Part of Tobago and mostly offshore areas. It did not affect us on land, but it could have.
Mm-hmm.
And that would be placed under a certain level of watch or, well, we use alerts in Trinidad, certain level of alert in the country, because you will see the Met Office place the entire country under alert.
Mm-hmm.
Because anywhere in the country, there's a reasonable risk of adverse impacts unfolding. But it doesn't necessarily mean that because it was sunny in your area, it was sunny across the entire country. Some parts of the island, so for example, we see some significant floods 2 weekends ago happen in San Fernando, but everywhere else across the country was dry. Well, for the most part. We did see some flooding in Central as well. But it's a difficult thing to pinpoint exactly where these pop-up showers and thunderstorms occur during the wet season. We know generally it's going to occur along hilly areas, so that's the northern range, and to a lesser extent the central and southern range. And we know for it with a high chance of certainty it's going to occur western coastal areas of Trinidad. And we see that during the wet season, but the intensity of some of these things can be the difference with some needed heat relief. And we need to get the firefighters out there to do high water rescues, like we saw 2 weekends ago in San Fernando.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay, so we know that it's unpredictable, and I guess that's partly of the joy. That's something you like, I suspect.
Yeah, I mean, my day is never the same. Even though it might be the same some days, my day is never the same. I absolutely love the job that I do because of that. And it's very, very little monotony. And I appreciate that in my job. But at the same time, when it comes to last year we had 3 big events that did not materialize. Potential tropical cyclone 2 in June. We had another issue in August and another issue in September. All three of those were very high impact, potential high impact events that didn't materialize. And when we have these repeated events, we tend to see a loss in confidence from the public to the Met Service and to us, because while the Met Service is the official voice for weather in Trinidad and Tobago, weather and climate information and watches and warnings, me and the other weather anchors across the other networks, we're also the public faces of the information that come out from the Met Service. So when they issue an alert, obviously it's a public warning that we have to alert the public to, but if it goes wrong, all of us collect the flag for it.
So that man Kalain never correct, boy. I see a question came in. I know we touched on it a bit, but I guess he wants to know if climate change, in your opinion, or global warming is real or is a real occurrence. I guess
it is. I mean, you would have to really, really look for evidence that disprove it. But remember that climate change is a natural phenomenon that has been made worse by human activity and human influence. So what humans have done since the Industrial Revolution till now, pump different types of atmospheric gases, namely fossil fuels, that has resulted in increased methane, CO2, water vapor into the atmosphere. And global warming is also a natural phenomenon because that's what allowed us to live on this planet, to keep our temperatures relatively stable. But think of these gases as they exist naturally in the atmosphere. It was a very thin blanket that occurred, and as you add more of these gases, the blanket got thicker and thicker and thicker, and the heat that usually is allowed to escape into space at night, it is more efficiently trapped on Earth. So you have what is called anthropogenic climate change and anthropogenic global warming, and that large word just means human-induced. So these things are natural, but they've been made worse by humans.
Now, is there a difference? I think the answer is yes, but I'm going to ask. There's no silly questions today. Is there a difference between weather reporting and natural disaster reporting? Because I'm thinking that something like an earthquake will not be on your radar of work.
Yes. So I am everything that happens naturally and sometimes not naturally, I report on it. So earthquakes, you remember my degree is geophysics and seismology. So like I have background in dealing with at least understanding, earthquakes, volcanoes, that kind of thing. So yeah, basically anything that happens from below the ground to above into space, I cover it.
Because my next question was, have you ever been on a field assignment where you would have probably left the country to report on an earthquake, to volcano, because our Caribbean islands, of course, we have all this different activity. And would you have ever been on the field to cover one of those disasters?
Well, in Trinidad and Tobago, I've covered the mud volcano eruptions, floods, tornadoes, tropical cyclones, the works. But internationally, when the St. Vincent volcano erupted in 2021, I mean, I was on vacation at the time. They gave me the option to go, but it was also during COVID, and I could not leave my house. Because I had my grandmother staying with me and I didn't want to put her at risk. So I turned that opportunity down. And another reporter who is no longer at GML, she went. And yeah, I mean, I reported on it from here. I don't necessarily need to be on the ground to report on what's unfolding. But locally, I've done the field reporting in a disaster and in instances where weather affected people, but not internationally, not yet. And hopefully I don't have to. No, have you ever been in a disaster zone post like immediately right after? It is pure chaos.
Pure chaos, yeah, water, and yeah. But you have been in Trinidad with the rain boots up to your knees and the raincoat and
yeah.
Okay. Because the Hollywood way, not even Hollywood. Sometimes you watch ABC and CBS and you see the poor journalists in the rain and the wind speeds are picking up and she's trying to cover and then the hat blows away.
Yeah, I mean, yes, it's great for theatrics, but ultimately that's not safe. And I practice what I preach. If I tell people don't drive through floodwaters, you wouldn't see me driving through floodwaters. If I tell people stay indoors, you won't see me outside. And thankfully, the newsroom that I work with, we have management that understand safety over everything. And we don't put reporters in danger's way unnecessarily. And if we can do it, I mean, it's not you're not going to see us going into strong winds like what they do in the US. Because at the end of the day, if we on television are telling you not to do this, why are we doing it too? We can safely do it from inside a structure, out of the passage of those very strong winds, out of the floods. We don't need to go into waist high water or chest high water to tell you don't come into the flooding. Yeah.
But in the multimedia world that we live in, especially GML, we know that's very strong on digital and multimedia. How then are journalists getting the footage? Is it all from citizens?
No, they go out for sure, but it does not mean if they go. I'll use an example that happened end of last year, or was it this year, when the Porsche Cayenne was swept into the flooding in Sangre Grande.
Mm-hmm.
With
Last year? Mm-hmm.
You had journalists from all the different media houses there. None of them went into the floodwaters. They all reported from the outskirts. And our cameras do these amazing things called zoom, and they can zoom in and get the footage just as clear as if they were in the floodwaters with them. You don't need to put yourselves in harm's way to get April 25th. There we go. Someone in the comments just said it. April 25th. Put yourselves in harm's way to get the shot that you want.
And have you ever had the experience of a press conference? I know it's very rare where we have a weather-related press conference where the entire nation has to be debriefed or briefed of what's occurring. Have you ever, or is there any instance where you've had to sit down and ask the Prime Minister or, as you said, Minister of Rural Development, these pressing questions about weather-related occurrence?
So I go to press conferences all the time, so it's not like a new thing for me. Generally, they are less severe instances. So talking about national climate conferences, disaster management things, where we are out of any impending threat or hazard. But when we are in those situations, my skills are better utilized in studio, telling people this is what's going on outside, these are the areas that are impacted, this is what we can expect. And you would usually see that play out in our severe weather coverage, while we would have another very capable journalist from our company, and multiple at times too, go to these press conferences and ask questions that they feel is important, as well as questions that I may feed to them to ask as well.
So just a question on the top of my head. As I said, no silly questions. So when you're in studio, anchors required to wear their own wardrobe. Who's doing it? Is it something that you're provided with? I always wanted to know, like, what goes on? Are you providing your hair?
It's a mix. So we have, well, at least for the men that anchor, we have a clothing sponsor now. That wasn't always the case.
Okay.
For Priya and the other women that occasionally anchor, sometimes we have clothing sponsors, sometimes we don't. Most times we use our own wardrobe. But again, not always the case. It's different for everybody. But we also have in GML a makeup artist that does our makeup. For the men, it's just powder on our face. It's nothing too fancy. But for the women, you have to hair, makeup, whole shebang to be on camera. So.
And as you are on a segment, because it's a weather segment, is it that you're behind the scenes and cued when to get on set?
Yeah, you know the structure of the newscast, so I know when to come back on set, and if I'm running late, I'll hear my senior producer or technical producer in my ear say, "Kalain, if you hear this, come and set now," kind of things. But yeah, we are aware of when to be back on set to go live for our different segments. Yeah.
And earlier, someone asked if they're going to be seeing you tonight. Well, I don't think you'll work weekends, correct?
Yes. So if I work a weekend, no, things are bad. Yeah, if I'm on set during a weekend, it means that we may have just had a very large earthquake or a flood or a storm is on the horizon. Yeah, I don't usually work weekend and public holidays unless we have something major that is breaking, developing, or on its way.
Okay. Another part of the broadcast that I see often, ever since I was a child, and I always tell you about is it? You'll correct me, of course, but I know they always give you the waves, the measurements.
Yeah.
What is that all about? See,
So
there's
we remember we are an island, and we have a lot of coastal communities that are primarily fishing villages, and the fishermen know what that means. Like seas are slight to moderate in open
Yes.
water, waves are between 1.5 and 2 meters. In sheltered areas, waves are below 1 meter, that kind of thing, right? So yeah, open waters means that it's away from the coast. These are where fishermen would go out. These are where ferries would pass between Trinidad and Tobago. And you remember, these fishermen, they don't usually go out in very large boats, so these bigger waves can be a massive issue for them for their safety. But in sheltered areas means our bays, our beaches, our nearshore coastal areas. Sheltered areas also means where the winds are not directly impacting it. So the Gulf of Paria, western coast of Tobago, like very nearshore western coast of Tobago, that's where we tend to see these calmer seas. But when you start seeing those bigger waves, that means it requires a different set of actions from mariners, marine interests. Yeah.
How do you predict what the wave would be like the next day? What tools are?
It's a mix of knowing what the winds are doing in the atmosphere,
Yeah.
and knowing what waves are already being recorded. So weather is a mix of knowing weather, hydrology, meteorology, marine science, all of these things. It's a mix of using the data that we have available to us, which is from buoys, from ships, from weather observation stations, from satellites. That's information that we can concretely see, as well as numerical weather prediction and ocean prediction models that we also use from across the world to figure out not only how the weather is going to play out, but Saharan dust, the ocean, swells, all of these things. So specific to waves, we look at ship reports, we look at what other islands are reporting, we look at areas of low and high pressure, pressure gradients, how the winds are influencing the ocean. And also you can tell just based on the sort of what we tend to get a lot of waves either coming from the east or swells from the north. So our northern islands tend to experience swells first, then us, and then from the east we look at waves. Well, we look at winds to determine our waves. Yeah.
So you did say, correct me if I'm wrong, those little buoys, they are reporting weather patterns as they bob up and down?
All of them. You have very specific ones. Some of them are just there to, guide ships. Some of them are placed very intentionally to collect different types of data out in the ocean. So they can collect anything from just wave heights and swells to water temperature to a certain depth, winds, temperature, humidity, a bunch of different parameters, but different buoys collect different things.
Yeah. Very good information. And I'm not sure how long we're on, but we're up. 6:54, almost an hour. You mentioned Saharan dust, and I think citizens are quite fed up of the Saharan dust. We don't know where it came from, why it's still here, when can it go away. So on behalf of all citizens, what is Saharan dust? Why is it here? When is it going away? And leave us alone.
So I'll start with when is it going away? It's not going to go away.
No.
Saharan dust, in the history of at least our most recent construction of how our planet is, has been transported from the African continent to parts of the Western Hemisphere, and it provides very needed nutrients to the Amazon rainforest and tropical rainforests. It comes from the northern portion of Africa, the Saharan desert, hence the Saharan dust, and it moves across the atmosphere at low levels, low to mid levels, so we're talking between 5,000 and 15,000 feet, from the African coast all the way across to South America, the Caribbean region, and in some occasional instances, make it all the way to the United States and across the entire Caribbean region. The dust has been here before we've been here, and it will be here after we have been here.
Wow.
It comes in fluctuating intensities across the region, and different months of the year have higher dust levels, so we tend to see more prolonged dust concentrations during the dry season compared to the wet season, but especially during the the first half of the wet season, we tend to get tropical waves moving off the African coast, whipping up some dense plume of dust that moves across the Atlantic Ocean as well and affect us. Now, I do want to say, though, a lot of people have saying, oh, when I was younger, we never used to deal with this.
No.
Yeah, you deal with it. Yeah, you used to deal with this. The thing is, it wasn't reported. When I jumped on the scene with Weather Center and with CNC3, Saharan dust affects me, and I always knew it used to affect me, so I started reporting on it. And then you see everybody gets in line with reporting on Saharan dust across the region. But it has been a problem. It also has been a lot more noticeable because people realize, wait a minute, oh, that's what that is. And then they start attributing every symptom they have under the sun to Saharan dust. But remember, you can be allergic to the dust and it affects your respiratory system, but you can also be allergic to all the other pollutants that exist in our atmosphere too. Trinidad and Tobago has a lot of cars for our tiny little islands, and that gives off a lot of particulate matter into the atmosphere from just exhaust. And that exhaust has a bunch of different carbon particles and other particles that affect your respiratory system. We also have a lot of trees and flowers that produce pollen throughout the year. This affects our respiratory system too. So days when people, and just from my personal perspective, the longer the dust remains in the air, even if it's at mild concentrations, it tends to affect people more. So it's not always the Saharan dust that is racking you up, making you take the Allegra D and the Allegrid and the inhalers. It is sometimes other dust and other allergens that exist in the atmosphere that's affecting you too.
Okay, folks, so you've just been schooled. It's been here for a while, and it's not going anywhere. It's, as he said, it's always been here. It's just, because I remember I would be like, look, rain coming. And people were like, no, they're like, Saharan dust, duh. So now we know what it is, thanks to anchors like Kalain, who would have put a name and a face to what we've always had. And like, yeah, or Peter landfill too.
Yeah, I mean, our landfills too. I mean, the fires during the dry season, we have a lot of fires that contributes to our particle pollution as well. Yeah.
Now, do you think having just 2 seasons, I'm going to wrap up soon, I've kept you here for about an hour, just having 2 seasons, Trinidad and Tobago, the wider Caribbean, we have wet season, dry season. That's an advantage in terms of journalism, because we don't have to face the weather, the snow and the torrential rains. Yeah, is that a plus, having just 2 seasons?
I mean, the wet and dry seasons are based on long-term climate. It doesn't mean that, we have a period of prolonged dryness anymore, or a period of prolonged wet anymore. And we can just look back to the past couple of dry seasons, which have been quite wet. So, I mean, yeah, it's nice to have these 2 very neat little demarked seasons throughout the year, but in reality, we have much more seasons than that. In Trinidad and Tobago, we have the wet and dry season that everybody know about. We also have the heat season, which runs from generally March through October. We have the hurricane season, which runs from June through November. We have, we have different seasons that just generally go underreported because it's always hot. You don't need to for that. And what is going to happen as a result of climate change is our dry seasons are going to remain dry. Our wet seasons are going to unfortunately get drier. We'll see a change in how our rain falls. So that dry season cutoff date, it usually ends with the passage of a tropical wave or the intertropical convergence or moving across us. Just because one of those features move across us doesn't mean we're going to get prolonged rain. Look at what we're experiencing right now. We have tropical waves moving across us all the time, but it's not producing any rain right now, at least any significant rain right now.
And is this El Nino expected to last? I remember. So, I don't know.
So El Nino is elevated sea surface temperatures in the Pacific Ocean that causes a rising motion there, and as a result, we tend to see sinking motion in the atmosphere in the Atlantic. It tends to suppress rainfall across the southern Caribbean and parts of South America. It also suppresses Atlantic hurricane activity. Now, El Nino is it's a not easy thing to forecast, but it has impacted how we receive our rainfall across the Caribbean region in the past. and El Niños can last anywhere from a couple months, 9 months, to 3 years in some instances. Latest forecast models show that we are in an El Nino, and we will continue to experience El Nino-like conditions through the first half of next year. How strong that El Nino becomes, we wait to see. But for this particular El Nino event, we are also dealing with the background of a very, 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 I can't even stress that enough, a very warm climate. The Atlantic Ocean is the warmest ever recorded in satellite history. And that warm water can fuel stronger tropical cyclones if they do form. It can fuel heavier showers and thunderstorms in Trinidad and Tobago, which can produce some of the needed rain we'll need to go into the dry season. But the heat-driven thunderstorms tend to occur in the western parts of Trinidad, where we don't have reservoirs because of, they don't necessarily exist in those areas. So yeah, El Nino is here. It's expected to last a little while, and we will continue to see some of the impacts of El Nino, well, in the Caribbean region, but across the globe, play out in the coming months.
Okay, I think that's a safe space to end our conversation. I've had you here for an hour and 2 minutes. I'm so sorry.
You're fine, you're fine.
I really like the engagement with our fans. I think a lot of the questions came from a very informed place. So we know that persons are paying attention, at least they're trying to. And yeah, I want to thank you. I reached out to you on Twitter, and I asked Carissa Lee to jump in and just I hope she did a good job. She did, yeah. So thank you for accepting the invitation. I hope that it really was a good conversation. I know I fumbled here a bit. It's because I'm not quite too okra with the jargon. But I like to do it like this, just be very silly, off the top of my head. What the John public might ask, what a little 5-year-old may ask.
Yeah.
So thank you so much for accepting the invitation. Thank you to our listening and viewing audience. Thank you, Kalain. Would you like to say anything to your fans? I see a lot of emojis going on. So you have
I would say as we go through the rest of this wet and hurricane season, it's important to be prepared. Know how to respond to different alerts, watches, warnings. When it does, they are being issued for the Caribbean region and for us. And also, I always tell people, when it comes to flooding, do not drive through floodwaters. That is a pet peeve of mine. I would love to see it cut out. I love when I watch these flooding videos and I see people turning around. Good job. So yeah, turn around, don't drown. That is my parting words to you.
And thank you to Kalain's family. I think your cousin joined. I think my cousin joined. So thank you to everyone. Be safe out there. Thank you a million, Kalain. And we'll be in touch. Bye, everyone.